So my fancy slide at the beginning of each week, just in case you haven't been here for whatever reason. We are currently on week 5 of Jesus's parables. We've been talking about the ways in which Jesus taught the people. And we've gone through the parable of the mustard seed, the parable of the laborers in the vineyard, the parables of the lost, the parable of the Good Samaritan, and today it's the parable of the persistent widow. Many of these sometimes have different names, but those are some of the more common ones. Before I go too far, does anybody want to share something they've learned from these 4 weeks leading into 5 weeks? Just a little nugget maybe that has stuck with you or something you've been wrestling with over these weeks? Any brave souls? Yes. Yeah, so in your small group, you talked about last week with the Good Samaritan relating to the injured person on the side of the road instead of the Samaritan or the people who passed them by, and it was a different look and made for some great conversation. Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, it's a quiet morning. Okay, this is the part where we take a coffee break. No, just kidding. Well, yeah.
The mustard seed.
Yes.
I love that. Just having the faith of a mustard.
Ooh, the faith of a mustard seed, and just how comforting that is, and just beautiful that that great things can start out so small. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks. Yes, Gretchen.
A long discussion on biases.
Ooh.
From the Good Samaritan and the biases at that time and what they were and then currently.
Yeah. So from the Good Samaritan, you talked a lot about biases, and the biases of that day, and then the biases that we currently have. That's powerful conversation. That's hard and holy work. All right, so parables, as you may know by now, they're stories with a point. They're meant to challenge and discomfort, and Jesus doesn't leave the listener where they were. Today may be our most challenging parable yet. It's less common than some of the other ones we've talked about. This one shows up far less in worship services. And, maybe that's some good news, too, that if a parable is challenging or disturbing, it usually means it's working. That the purpose isn't necessarily to just feel good. It's meant to, change things. Even the parable of the mustard seed was given to an audience who was kind of going, I don't know what's going on. And that was meant to be a challenge of comfort, of saying, hey, you can start small and create great things. So today's parable is a parable of prayer, of not losing heart, leading them towards justice, and ending with a question. Now, we're going to get more into that, so you don't have to write that down. We'll dive further into that. But it's typically called the parable of the persistent widow, the parable of the unjust judge, and the parable of the widow and the judge. Like we've talked about in previous weeks, there is power in the name, and the name we give to a parable often kind of gives the lens through which we want to see it. So I'm trying to give multiple angles because there are multiple ways to read something that may be unfamiliar to us. And there was the homework to read it ahead of time if you had the chance to do that. If you didn't, no worries, we're going to read it here. And before we dive into it, I want to ask, what are our expectations of widows in the Bible? Yeah, Marge.
God always takes care of widows.
God takes care of widows. Yep. What are some of the other expectations or maybe thoughts around widows in the Bible?
Poor.
What? Poor. Okay, I heard a different word at first, so I'm glad you clarified. Don't worry, it actually makes sense. It fits really well, and we'll get to that in a minute. What else?
The society didn't really value or even always provide for them.
Yeah, the society didn't value them or always provide for them, which is why we perceive them as being poor, right? That in need of help. So in the laws, in the Jewish laws, they would say, okay, when you're tending to your farms, make sure you have enough for you and your household, and also save a portion of it for the orphans, the widows, and the foreign aliens. That they were part of this designation of people who often were perceived as needing help. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else? Yeah, Cindy.
Except they did take care of them if the widow was left with children. The closest male relative who wasn't married had to marry.
Yes, so they're in it.
The children were saved.
Yes. So if there was a widow with children and the husband passes, then in that family system, they would essentially, she would become part of the family of the brother. So that way there was a way to take care of them. Yep. So there were ways to take care of them. That's some, I'll admit my own bias here. As a woman who lives today, if that were the case in my family, I would say, I am not going to go. Because there's a little bit more agency, but that is a very real point, Cindy, about how the structure in the Bible was. Absolutely. Anything else? Oh yeah, Donna.
I think they were really tough.
Really tough. The widows were really tough.
Nobody cared.
Nobody cared. They had to take care of themselves. They kind of had to find their own way. Yeah. These are all great. I love this. Okay, how about... Oh, sorry. Yes, Chris.
How about comparing them to being more like homeless today, especially if they had no children, then they were, and if no one in the family stepped up, they were just left on their own, and kind of like our homeless today.
Yeah, so comparing the widows of the Bible to those who are homeless today, that they had to really fight for their own livelihood. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, all right. Sorry. I'm going to keep. We expect them to be meek. That is a great transition into the story for today. So what are our expectation of judges in the Bible? If we're talking about widows, let's also talk about judges. Corrupt. That's an expectation. That's a stereotype. Yeah, Cheryl. Judges were there to settle disputes. Yeah. I mean, in Old Testament, judges were also oftentimes ordained by God in some sense, or that was the way that they were held up in society. That they were righteous and upright citizens, that they were crafty and supportive and leaders. They were rulers. Yes, Cindy.
And when we did that other lesson, they said that outside of that, the judges led people into battle.
That the judges led people into battle. Yeah, they were leaders in society. Absolutely. Yeah. And there was some of the, like after going through the story Bible last year, like we knew some judges were good and some judges were less than good, right? All right, well, to give a little bit of context and to kind of give a little bit more depth to this, I've got some of the widows in the Bible from the Old Testament. So Tamar is the first widow who shows up in the Bible. She is in Genesis 38, verses 6 through 30, and this is where the comment comes in. So she is the first recorded widow. She is the daughter-in-law of Judah, which is one of the 12 sons. So this is the tribe of Judah. And her husband ends up passing away. And in that culture, like we talked about how she would move with the brother's family, the husband's brother's family. So her husband dies. She goes to his brother's household, and then he ends up dying. Then the third brother decides, whoa, I don't want to have kids with you because my brothers are now dead. And so he chooses to not have kids with her by doing something else to prevent kids. I won't go into details. You can read Genesis. And then because he did that, he ends up passing away as the story goes. God says, hey, you're not being faithful to this new wife of yours, and then therefore he dies in the story. And then they have a fourth brother who is young at the time, and so she's kind of kept in the household, but kind of kept in the corner until he is coming of age. He comes of age, and the father, Judah, says, I don't want to promise my last son to you because I know what happened to the first three. And there is this stereotype that it is her fault. Yeah. So Judah is going to go shear the sheep off into the farmland, and she sees this as an opportunity. She covers her face, as in the picture shows, and she sits on the side of the road, and Judah goes, there's a woman on the side of the road. Dun, dun, dun. You know where this is going. Again, you can read Genesis for the details. He goes, well, what would you like for payment for these services? And she goes, well, give me your ring and your staff, and then you can pay me later. Like, I'll hold on to these until you can pay me. And so they do the deed. She has his ring and his staff, and then later he tries to find her again and cannot find this woman on the side of the road. He asks people at the temple where she may be, and they don't know. They're like, what woman are you talking about? There's no woman who's been on the side of the road. And he all of a sudden, he's kind of going, uh-oh, this woman has my ring and my staff. This isn't good for me. If anybody were to find out, this would be bad news. Give it a couple of months, and all of a sudden, Tamar's pregnant. And Judah sees this as his opportunity to oust her from the house. She's pregnant. It's not my son's. Like, clearly there's been no betrothal, so like we're going to stone her to death. And he goes, okay, well, you're pregnant. Who did this to you? And she goes, well, the man whose staff and ring these are is the father. And all of a sudden, he realizes a big problem. So she is the first widow in our Bible. She is smart and determined. I mean, it's a different culture, so it's not, obviously not a means of getting out of a system that I would, be familiar with, nor would probably many of us. But that was her way to find a way out of this system that she found herself in. Interesting story, isn't it? Genesis 38, if you're really interested for the full story. You got the Cliff Notes version here. But I think she's really important because right from the beginning of the Bible, she also shows that widows don't always fit our stereotypes of what widows in the Bible don't always fit the stereotypes that we have for them. The next ones who show up are Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah from the book of Ruth. Now the story, there's Naomi. She is from Bethlehem. She goes to, it was Moab, I believe. She goes to Moab. She is married there, has 2 sons. She has Moabite daughter-in-laws. And the husband and both of the sons end up passing away far too soon. And Naomi is kind of going, what am I doing here? I'm in a foreign land because famine brought me out here long ago. And she decides she's going to go back to Bethlehem from where she came from. And her daughter-in-laws say, we're coming with you. And she says, no, my daughter, no, I am too sad. I'm going to go do this. Go back to your parents' house. Maybe you can be remarried. And Orpah stays, and Ruth says, no. Where you go, I go. Where you stay, I stay. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. And they create this beautiful friendship. And so Ruth goes back with Naomi to Bethlehem. They are able to work on the farmland, that portion that is reserved for those who may be in more need of help. And they meet Boaz, who is a distant relative of Naomi's, who says, you know what, I'm going to let you farm whatever you want, glean whatever you need to glean, make a living for yourselves because you were good to one another. They create this beautiful sense of family and community. And then Ruth and Boaz end up getting married and having kids, and then she ends up in the lineage of Jesus. So an important widow right there. And again, it also shows that our expectations are, okay, people only support widows by giving things to them. And really, they worked for their community. They put their livelihood depended on it, and they created something really beautiful, even though our stereotypes may say, okay, well, maybe not, but they were able to find happiness and joy within it. And I think, and let's see, I've got one more before I go into the main points of this. The widow of Zarephath. She does not have a name. This is still the same picture of Tamar, even though I just really like the photo. This is from 1 Kings 17, is the widow of Zarephath. And in this story, Elijah is traveling. I believe Elijah's traveling, and God says, Elijah, go find this widow in Zarephath, ask her for some food. So he shows up there, and she has got just these little morsels of food available, and he goes, okay, well, please, can you give me this traveler, some food? And she goes, I only have this little bit. I am planning to prepare it for my son and I, so that way we may eat it and we may die. This is how dire straits their lives were in, is that they had this little bit of food that probably very malnourished, and that they were going to eat it and then realize that they did not have enough to last any longer on this earth. And he says, okay, well, prepare something for your son, but first give me just a little morsel of this. Prepare a little cake out of what you are making for me. And she obliges. And he also tells her that, God will not let your food run out. So prepare this for me, and God will provide for you. And so she does. She trusts him, and then the food lasts for weeks, for days, for weeks. Feeds not only her and her son, but the whole household around her. And it ends up being this beautiful miracle story about the ways in which God provided for her. It's interesting that, so it's in 1 Kings 17. I've got the Cliff Notes version because it's a very long story, but she's ready to die. She fights with him a little bit, but really she trusts that God will provide when he says that God's going to provide. And there's something really powerful in that when she's at the end of her rope, at the end, made this really tough decision, and she trusts that God will provide, and God does. So, all of this to say that we have some impressions of who widows are in the Bible. And maybe these stereotypes and these impressions are a little bit incomplete. That widows then and widows now are just as human and complex as everybody else. I say this knowing that there are probably many people in this room who have experiences that I don't have, who hopefully you hear a message of grace in this, that we are all human, and that it is not just messages of the way in which the Bible has told the story, or we have interpreted the Bible, can hopefully bring more light to, hopefully bring more complexity and grace and God's presence in all of this. All right. We also have the Gospel of Luke and widows. So then there is also Anna, who is in chapter 2, where the Gospel of Luke takes a different stance than the Old Testament did, in the sense of she's seen as praying in the temple, praying for the Messiah, praying for a child, and God who provides. And then there's the many widows of Israel who get mentioned, including the widow of Zarephath. But instead of it being about her actions, it's about Elijah coming to visit her and Elijah being almost the Savior-esque. It's less about her agency and more about him. And then there is the widow of Nain, where in chapter 7, where her only son died and she is grieving and sad. And Jesus had compassion on her and then told her son to speak, and then all of a sudden he did. And it's this beautiful story. One difference from the first three that I mentioned is they had a lot of agency. They had a lot, their actions shaped who they were and the world around them, and their stories are ones to be celebrated and honored. These ones are also the same, but also the Gospel of Luke tends to put them more in supporting character roles. It's about what Elijah does. It's about what Jesus does. It's about praying and all of those different things that go around it. So I think that's an interesting dichotomy, and maybe where we get some of these stereotypes in the Bible. And the quote I have here is, widows, like all women, like all humans, have complex personalities and not always transparent motives, as we learned from some of the earlier ones. We readers choose how to understand them. And the same can be with the judges, too. In the Bible, judges were leaders who were appointed by God to govern and lead the Israelite people. They were chosen for their wisdom, courage, and ability to lead the Israelites in battle against their enemies. They also served as spiritual leaders, interpreting the law of God and helping the people to stay true to their faith. And some of the most famous judges in the Bible include Deborah, Gideon, and Samson. And they too are complex because, as mentioned, not all of them ruled faithfully. I mean, these are three who did, not the three. They are three who did, but there is also some, read the book of Judges if you really want to adventure. It's a scary book filled with things that I wouldn't always think of being in the Bible. So, any questions so far? I'm throwing a lot of content at you, and I know there's not a lot on that piece of paper I gave you. All right, well, let's dive into the parable for today. Let's dive into this story of Jesus from Luke 18. Then Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and not to lose heart. He said, in a certain city, there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for people. In that city, there was a widow who kept coming to him and saying, "Grant me justice against my opponent." For a while he refused, but later he said to himself, "Though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice, so that she may not wear me out by continually coming." Now, it should be noted here that the Greek for the word bothering me would be a little bit more stronger than what is translated here. It would have been, it'd probably be more consistent with saying, she is giving me a black eye. She is fighting me. And a black eye, not just with her fists, but with her words. She is ruining my reputation. She is really pestering me to the point where I can't do anything else. And the Lord said, "Listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long in helping them? I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them. And yet when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?" It's a short parable. What did you hear? The judge did not fear God and did not respect people. So this judge is not the stereotype of how judges were in the Bible, right? Because judges were appointed by God to lead and be good leaders. And clearly, appointed by God means nothing to this judge. Yeah. What else did you hear? Yeah, Gretchen.
Courage and perseverance.
Courage and perseverance. From who?
The widow.
The widow? Not the judge?
No.
Well, maybe a little bit of courage and perseverance if she's giving him a black eye.
She kept at it and she wore him down.
She kept at it and she wore him down. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Marge.
Always pray and not lose heart.
Always pray and not lose heart. Yeah. Because that's the start of the parable, and we'll get more into that in a little bit, too.
And we're not to worry.
And not to worry.
Remember that. It's really important.
Yep. So an interesting piece of context with the widow who has courage and perseverance is that her actions in this parable. What is she doing? What is she doing in this parable? She's bothering him, right? Do you think she was in need of financial support or had her own means? If she's able to spend her days at the foot of a judge bothering him, she likely had her own means. She is one who probably was pretty self-sufficient in her own right, which is a beautiful juxtaposition from the stereotype. Do we know her motives? Here, I'll go. There we go. Her motives are unclear in this. I mean, is she persistent for a faithful reason? If you look at the text on your handout, what does it say? What's her reason for being persistent? She wants justice. Is it a faithful reason? We don't know. It could be. It might not be. Is she being friendly in her attempts to get this justice? Probably not. I mean, if she's giving him a black eye, she's out for vengeance. She's out for revenge. This is not consistent with the stereotypes and expectations we hold. Are they wrong? No. Do we know more of the details? No, we don't. All she wants is justice. Someone wronged her, and she is screaming for that wrong to be righted. I mean, I feel that sometimes. Let's see here. As a female, I try to resonate with her a little bit. Like, she's got that main character energy that I want to embody sometimes. And she's the opposite of how the Gospel of Luke tries to portray women, especially widows. I mean, because we notice in the Gospel of Luke, they tend to have more supporting character vibes, not the main character energy. And I think she shows that that widows in general in the Bible are expected to be weak, but can actually move mountains. Expected to be poor, but are great stewards of their resources. Expected to be exploited, but, woe to the one who tries to pull one over on her. That judge is, the judge is kind of saying, okay, just be done. I'm ready to be done. And
I keep wondering, why did Jesus tell this story?
Why did Jesus tell that?
Because the others that we've already done all had an obvious point.
Yes. So you're wondering why Jesus told this story, because the other ones had a pretty obvious point, and this one feels more complex, doesn't it? I mean, we're like kind of wading through the muck of this parable a little bit, because even the judge, too, is just really off-putting. And especially if the parable ends with, kind of saying, well, if the judge does this, then imagine what God can do. It feels kind of uncomfortable, doesn't it? I mean, Jesus is saying that this God is the opposite of the judge, but to make that point feels a little weird. You're going to get a great point. We're going to get there, at least some idea. So hopefully you'll have a lot of time in small groups to be able to talk about this. Let's see here. So putting this back in the context of the Gospel of Luke. In the context of prayer, in the beginning, Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and not lose heart. We can see prayer as, at least from the perspective of the widow in the parable, that prayer is less about, sitting down, folding hands, bowing our heads, and more about shaking fists is kind of what it looks like. And in this context of prayer, this parable feels almost a little bit problematic. Kind of like what you're talking about. Like, are we supposed to harass God until God relents? Is that what prayer is supposed to be about? I mean, when we receive answers to prayers, is it because God is tired of hearing our voice and wants us to, sit down and shut up? No, because then it gets into God is unlike the judge. I mean, and the Lord said, listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he delay long in helping them? So Jesus is saying that God is the opposite of the unjust judge. Exactly. All right, where am I at in here? Because I know I get to a really good point somewhere in here. What happens if prayers feel unanswered? I think is also one of the questions that this lends to. Because if a prayer feels unanswered, it can be heartbreaking. And that it may lead us to feel like God is the unjust judge, right? And that is the opposite of what Jesus is trying to say. Let's see here. I think it leads to the challenge. that neither the widow nor the judge are fully likable. They both have unspoken things that don't give us a full picture of their humanity. They aren't fully innocent, nor are they fully bad. They are complex, just like the rest of us. And I wonder if this parable is less about God and more about us. I mean, maybe it's more about the state of our hearts and the motivation of our prayers. Like what drives us to be in prayer? It's a good question to wrestle with. And what can we learn if we put ourselves in the place of the widow? I mean, she does not lose heart. She is bold, brassy, sassy, little bit smart. I'm not going to finish that sentence. She knows what she's about, and she's fervent to get it. Like the widows who came before her, she calls the judge to the table. And what happens if we pray like her, really persistently? What happens to our hearts in those moments when we pray fervently? I don't know about you, but I feel like it makes my heart a little bit stronger. Makes me feel more connected to God even if I don't get the answers I want. Or if God feels silent, it kind of creates this inner wrestling within me. But I wonder, what if God is the widow in this parable? You know, throughout the Bible, God is, where is this? God not only hears the cries of those who are perceived as helpless, but God is in their cries. The Psalms are all about how God dwells in the unseen, the unheard, the unloved. Could God be the wronged widow, pleading for justice, pleading with us to listen? If that's the case, then maybe we're the unjust judge. I mean, it's a hard pill to swallow, but, you know, have we ever been indifferent, closed off, irritable, unsympathetic? I hear a yep, me too. I'm right there.
Where did you come up with the idea that God is the widow?
Where did I come up with the idea that God is the widow? I'm not the first. I've been reading lots of resources, but I think there's something powerful about it. Because if God is the widow, then and if this is in the context of prayer, then prayer is the only thing that will wear down that inner judge within us. Those parts of us that want to be irritable and closed off. And then prayer becomes something very powerful. And persistence can be the key in that. I know, this is a fun thing to wrestle with, isn't it? I'll be honest, I found this commentary and it was mind-blowing, even for me, as I've been sitting here wrestling with this text for about a week.
Go back to the point you made earlier, though, that the widow sounds like she's dressing for revenge. So is God vengeful? I don't think God is vengeful.
Ooh, so Chris said, go back to that point where the point where the widow is dressing for revenge, and is God vengeful? I don't perceive God to be vengeful, but I have read stories in the Bible of God feeling pretty vengeful. It's not always the view of God I like. And does God's vengeance lean towards the arc of justice? That's a great question to raise, and I hope you get to talk about that in small group. I see a hand way back there. Yeah. So God is all-knowing. God knows what's happened in the future, or knows what's happened in the past, can know what is happening in the future. And that's a great point to make. And I think that this is a story that Jesus tells that is pretty ambiguous. It's pretty challenging. And there's nothing that says that God can't be the widow in this parable. There's nothing that says God is the widow in this parable. That's what makes this challenging. And again, if a parable is challenging, it means it's doing something. Because whether we agree or disagree with it, it's causing us to articulate our faith. It's causing us to articulate what we believe or don't believe about God. So, I mean, to Chris, to your question, is God vengeful? You're now wrestling with, what does this mean in this kind of light? And that will help you get a deeper sense of faith in articulating, okay, well, either yes for these reasons or no for these reasons. And it can give you a rock to stand on and not a pebble of sand. Pardon my metaphors there. All right. But I really like that idea of how God is the one who equips us with prayer to wear down that inner judge within us, because I do feel that inner judge in me more often than I care to admit. So I find this idea to be something worth wrestling with. So maybe you'll get a chance to wrestle with it too. And maybe, as all these parables, as I have so many different ways to go about this, when we can't find justice in a story, maybe we have to look internally. We have to look at what we bring to the scripture, what we bring to the story, and name that as part of it. Maybe we have to look at our stereotypes that we hold that get in the way of the gospel message. I mean, can we see God in the widow instead of in the judge? Is this something worth wrestling with? You can disagree with me, it's okay. And Jesus provokes us to elicit a response. Responses help us articulate and fight for what we actually believe. One of the authors I read, she wrote, the parable forces me to cross-examine my own views, rather than look at the Bible or the parable as a book about answers. This parable, and the Bible in general, is a book that says, help me to ask the right questions. And I think that's really important, because it's about asking the questions rather than finding the answers. So with that, next week you're starting a new series on Enough by Adam Hamilton. There are copies in Reflection of Faith, and enjoy small group. I hope I stirred up enough conversation. So thank you so much.